He once stood on the edge of a rooftop, and the only thing that made him stop was a bird he had never paid attention to before. The wind blew strongly through the tall buildings, carrying the remaining heat of a long day. The sun was slowly lowering toward the horizon, its orange-red light covering everything in a layer that felt warm, yet made people feel strangely lonely. Daniel Carter stood there, his hands lightly placed on the railing, not gripping tightly, but not letting go either. He didn't look down. He didn't look up. He just stood like someone who had reached the limit of his thoughts. 38 years old, a husband, a father of 2 children, and now, a man who had just lost everything once called stability. There was no noise in his mind at that moment. No numbers, no bills, no debt reminder calls, only a long emptiness, as if someone had turned off all the sound inside him. But things were not always like this. Just 3 months earlier, Daniel's life was what many would call ideal stability. A government job, not too stressful, not highly paid, but steady. A small house in the suburbs, a family car, a thoughtful wife. 2 children who made him tired, but also gave him a reason to keep going. He was not rich, but he never thought he would fall. Until that day. An email appeared in the internal mailbox. No special subject, no warning signs, just a notice of an urgent meeting. 15 minutes later, everything ended. We're downsizing. Nothing more. No long enough apology. No meaningful explanation. No chance to fix anything. No transition period. Just erased. 8 years of work wrapped into a single sentence. Daniel clearly remembered how it felt. Not shock, not anger, but emptiness. As if someone had pulled the ground from beneath his feet, but he had not yet fallen. 3 days later, he started looking for a job. 1 week later, he began to worry. 2 weeks later, he began to feel afraid. 3 weeks later, he began to realize something he had never thought about before. He no longer had enough money to maintain this life any longer. Electric bills were due. The house payment was nearly overdue. Credit cards were close to the limit. And the calls began. "Sir, this is a reminder. Your payment is overdue. We need to discuss your account." Daniel still answered politely. Still said, "Yes, I understand." Still promised he would handle it. But after each call, he sat in silence longer. His wife began to notice something was wrong. She didn't question him repeatedly. She didn't pressure him. She only gently asked, "Are you okay?" And Daniel always answered, "I'm okay." But both of them knew that was not the truth. One evening, when the 2 children were asleep, his wife placed a stack of bills on the table. She said nothing. She just looked at him. Not a blaming look, but a look of trust, and that made him feel heavier than any blame. He was not only failing himself, he was failing those who depended on him. That night, he did not sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, thoughts passing like numbers with no solution. What did he do wrong? Why did everything come to this? And most importantly, what would he do next? There were no answers. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual, not because he had a plan, but because he could not continue lying there. He took his children to school, smiled, spoke normally, as if everything was still fine. But when he returned to the car, the smile disappeared. He did not go home, he drove. No destination, no goal, just movement. And then, without understanding why, he returned to the old building. The place he used to work. The place he once thought he belonged. He parked, sat in the car for a while, looked up, no badge to enter anymore, no reason to enter. But he still stepped out. The side door was still open. He walked up the stairs, step by step, slow, heavy. Not because he was tired, but because each step reminded him of what he had lost. And then he reached the rooftop. The metal door made a dry sound as it opened. The wind blew strongly. No one was there, only the sky. He stepped toward the railing, stopped, not to do anything extreme, but also not just to look at the view, just standing there. For a moment longer than usual, he thought of nothing. No plans, no solutions, no future, only the present, empty. And then he looked up. Against the late afternoon sky gradually turning blue-gray, a large shape moved across, slowly but fully controlled. Unlike any bird Daniel had seen before, it was not hurried, not panicked, not flapping continuously as if trying to keep balance. It simply glided in wide circles, as if the sky belonged to it. It was an eagle. Daniel was not someone who loved nature, nor the kind of person who usually paid attention to animals. But there was something about that bird that made him unable to look away. Not because it was rare, but because the way it existed in that vast space was completely different from everything around it. The wind began to grow stronger. Thicker clouds gathered, making the afternoon light heavier. The city below was still noisy, but up here, there was only the movement of the wind and the eagle. Smaller birds began to fly lower. They kept changing direction, flapping faster, as if trying to escape something approaching. Daniel realized that a storm was forming, but the eagle did not change. It did not descend, it did not rush. On the contrary, it lifted itself higher. Daniel frowned. Curiosity began replacing the emptiness from before. He stepped a little closer, his eyes following every movement of it. The eagle spread its wings wide, almost without flapping. Strong gusts of wind struck its body, but instead of being pushed back, it adjusted very slightly, almost impossible to notice. And then the wind lifted it up. It did not fight the storm. It used the storm. Daniel stood still. A slow thought appeared in his mind. Maybe strength is not always about resisting. Maybe sometimes strength is knowing how to use. The eagle continued gliding, higher, more stable, while the other birds had disappeared from sight. No more frantic wing sounds, no more chaos, only a strange silence in the increasingly strong wind. Daniel had never seen such calm before. Not the kind of calm from having no problems, but calm right inside the problem. He suddenly remembered something he had once read, but never truly understood. Eagles can see many times farther than humans. Not just distance, but clarity. It can detect prey from a distance where the human eye would only see a tiny dot. That meant it did not need to rush. It did not need to chase everything, because it had already seen in advance. Daniel felt his heartbeat slow down, not because everything was fine, but because for the first time he began to look at his situation from a different angle. During the past weeks, what had he been doing? He had been running. He had been sending applications everywhere. He had been trying to grab every opportunity, even when they did not fit. He had reacted like those birds flapping continuously, trying to escape a storm he could not control. But the eagle was different. It did not chase opportunities. It chose. The wind grew stronger. A distant thunder echoed. The eagle suddenly changed direction. Not because of panic, but as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. It stopped gliding. For a very brief moment, almost motionless in the air. Then suddenly it folded its wings. It dived. So fast that Daniel almost lost sight of it. No circling, no second attempt, no hesitation, just one straight line. Precise. Daniel held his breath. A few seconds later, the eagle appeared again, rising, carrying its prey in its talons. Not the closest prey, not the easiest prey, but the right one. Daniel could not explain why that moment affected him so much. But something in the way the eagle acted made him realize a truth he had been avoiding for a long time. He did not lack opportunities. He just was not seeing far enough to choose correctly. The wind still blew, but inside his mind, another kind of silence appeared. No more chaos, no more panic, just thinking. The eagle flew higher, then gradually disappeared into the distance, but the feeling it left behind remained. Daniel took his eyes off the sky. For the first time, he looked back at himself. Not with blame, but with observation. How had he been living? How had he reacted when everything collapsed? He had tried hard, but was it in the right direction? The answer was not comfortable, but it was clear. He had rushed. He had been afraid. He had acted without understanding what he was doing. And that was no different from those birds. A strong gust of wind blew, forcing him to hold tightly onto the railing. But this time, he did not feel it as an enemy. He looked toward where the eagle had disappeared. A thought appeared, clearer than anything in many weeks. If an animal can survive by understanding its environment, then maybe humans can too. Daniel stepped away from the railing, not rushed, not confused, just walking. But something had changed. He no longer felt like he was being carried away. He began to feel that he could learn how to fly again. That night, Daniel did not open his email as soon as he got home. He did not check his account. He did not look at the numbers. He sat down at the kitchen table, took a blank piece of paper, and wrote. Not a job application, not a list of places to send resumes, but a single question. What am I really looking for? He paused for a long time, then continued writing. Not what he thought others wanted, but what he knew he could do best. The skills he had accumulated, the things he had done that no one noticed. the strengths he had never truly used in the right way. He began to look at his life again, not as a series of failures, but as a set of data. Like the eagle, not always acting, but always observing. He realized something. For 8 years of working, he had never truly chosen his own path. He had only followed. Followed stability, followed safety, followed what was called right. But right was not always suitable. Eagles do not fly in flocks, not because they cannot, but because the way they exist is different. Daniel put the pen down. A strange feeling appeared. Not hope, but not despair either, but clarity. He did not yet know what he would do next, but he knew one thing. He would not continue running the same way anymore. The next morning, everything was still the same. The bills were still there. The pressure was still there. No miracle had happened overnight. But Daniel did not start his day by opening email. He started by thinking. He filtered. He did not send 10 applications, he sent 2. But this time, he understood clearly what he was doing. He did not say much in his emails, but everything he said had a purpose. He did not try to impress. He was simply precise, like the eagle. That day, nothing special happened. No calls, no good news, but also no feeling of panic. And that was already a change. That afternoon, while taking his child home, one of the 2 children asked him, "Dad, are you okay?" Daniel looked at him, smiled. This time, it was not pretending. "Yes, I'm okay," and for the first time, he believed it. The eagle had disappeared from the sky the day before, but its lesson remained, not about flying higher, not about being stronger, but about understanding how to fly. That night, when the whole family had gone to sleep, Daniel still sat alone in the kitchen, the yellow light casting down onto the unfinished paper. There was no longer the panic of the previous days, but there was no real relief either. Just a quiet state, as if everything inside him was waiting to be rearranged. He thought about the eagle again. Not the moment it dived for prey, not the moment it flew high in the wind, but the way it waited, the way it was patient, the way it did nothing until it needed to act. Daniel looked at his life again, this time slower, more carefully, as if he was observing himself from a distance. He realized something he had never accepted before. He had become used to comfort. Not an obvious laziness, but a quiet comfort. A stable job that did not force him to grow. An income enough to live that did not require risk. A repetitive life that did not require change. He was not wrong, but he was not moving forward either. And now, when everything had been taken away, he realized he had not been prepared. A heavy feeling appeared in his chest. Not fear, but truth. If he wanted things to be different, he would have to become a different person. Not just change what he did, but change who he was. He stood up and stepped out into the backyard. It was late at night. No sunlight. No warm orange of the afternoon. Only a dark, quiet sky and a space wide enough for him to think. He looked up. There was no eagle, but he still thought about it. In nature, eagles are not always strong as we see them. There are periods when they become weaker. Old feathers grow heavy. Talons are no longer as sharp. Hunting ability declines. They cannot continue living the same way without changing. And that change is not easy. Eagles go through a molting process, a long process that requires energy and patience. During that time, they are not as agile as before, not as powerful as before. They must accept a period of weakness in order to become stronger afterward. Daniel had never thought about this. He had always thought change had to be fast, had to bring results immediately, had to show difference right away. But the eagle was not like that. It accepted being weaker, accepted losing what was once familiar, to rebuild itself. Daniel took a deep breath. A decision began to form. Not a complete plan, not an immediate solution, but a commitment. He would not continue living the same way anymore. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual. No alarm clock, no one calling. He just woke up. His body was still tired, his mind still carried many worries, but he did not lie back down. He stood up. That was the first step, small, but different. He went out to run, not because he liked it. Not because he had time, but because he understood a simple thing. If he could not control his body, he would not be able to control his life. The first steps were heavy, breath short, legs aching, but he did not stop. Not because he was strong, but because he decided not to give up. That day, he did not send many applications. He spent time learning, not learning randomly, but learning with purpose. He began to read again things he had once ignored. Skills he thought he did not need. Knowledge he once said he would learn later. There was no more later, only now. The following days, nothing special happened. No big opportunity, no sudden turning point. Only repetition. Wake up early, train, study, research, choose opportunities carefully, and continue. Repeat. The first week, he still had motivation. The second week, he started to feel tired. The third week, he wanted to quit. Not because it was difficult, but because he saw no results. No one praised him, no one recognized him, no one told him he was on the right path. Only him and doubt. One morning, while running, he stopped. Not because he was tired, but because the familiar question returned. Is it worth it? He stood there, breathing heavily, looking down at the ground. Then he remembered the eagle. Not when it flew high, but when it did. Nothing. When it waited, when it observed. No one applauded it, no one told it was right, but it continued. Daniel closed his eyes. A simple thought appeared. Progress does not always feel like progress. He opened his eyes and kept running. The first month passed. No major changes. But one thing was clear. He was no longer the same person. He thought differently. He reacted differently. He no longer panicked when seeing bills. He no longer sent applications unconsciously. He began to understand what he was doing. The second month, a small opportunity appeared. Not a dream job, not a high salary, but an opportunity. This time, Daniel did not rush. He prepared, carefully. He researched the company, understood what they needed, understood what he had. He did not try to say a lot. He only said what was right. The interview ended. No promises, no immediate results. But when he walked out, Daniel did not feel like he had tried. He had shown exactly who he was. 1 week later, he received a call. Not a perfect job, but a step forward. He accepted, without hesitation, not out of desperation, but because he understood this was the next step. The days that followed were still not easy. He still had to work a lot, still had to save money, still had to face pressure. But one thing had completely changed. He no longer felt like he was being pushed. He was directing his path. One afternoon after work, he stood alone, looking up at the sky. There was no eagle, but he did not need to see it anymore, because the lesson was already inside him. Real change does not begin when you have results. It begins when you accept letting go of your old self, like the eagle, not because it wants to, but because if it does not, it cannot continue. Daniel took a deep breath. This time, no longer heavy, only clear. The winter morning of that year began like any other day, but there was one thing Daniel noticed the moment he stepped outside. It was not the cold, not the thin layer of fog covering the neighborhood. It was the feeling inside his own body that had changed. No longer the heaviness of someone being pressured, no longer the rush of someone trying to catch up with life, but a steady state, as if something inside him had finally settled. He did not think he had become successful, but he knew he was no longer the same man. The new job was not the end, but only the beginning. It demanded more than what he had been used to. Higher pressure, higher standards, no more comfort like before. But this time, Daniel was not looking for comfort. He was looking for progress. Every day he arrived earlier, not to impress, but to have time to prepare. He learned to observe before acting, to listen more than speak, to understand problems before offering solutions. He no longer worked just to complete tasks. He worked to understand the system. In meetings, he did not try to show that he knew everything. He chose the right moment to speak. Short, precise, valuable. Like the way the eagle dives. No multiple attempts. No mid-course adjustments. Just once. But right. People around him began to notice. Not because he was loud, but because he was effective. His decisions began to carry weight. His opinions began to be heard. There was no sudden transformation, but there was accumulation. And Daniel understood something he had never understood before. Success does not come from a single moment. It comes from repeated choices over a long enough time. 1 year passed. His life was still not completely stable, but it was no longer chaotic. Debts were gradually controlled. Bills were no longer a daily fear. He and his wife no longer had conversations filled with worry. But Daniel did not stop. He began to look further, not just at the current job, but at the future, like the eagle, not only seeing the prey in front, but seeing the entire area. He began to learn more, not because he had to, but because he understood. If he wanted to fly higher, he could not keep the same ability. He learned about finance, learned about investing, learned about how businesses operate. At first, everything was difficult. Unfamiliar concepts, complex numbers, small mistakes that cost money. There were investments that failed. There were decisions that caused losses. But this time, he did not panic. He did not see failure as an end. He saw it as data, like the eagle observing. Not every dive is successful, but each time it learned something. 3 years later, Daniel was no longer an employee. He started his own project. Not big, not flashy, but with a foundation. He did not rush to expand, did not rush to show off. He built, step by step, slow, but solid. People around him did not understand. Some said he was reckless. Some said he left a stable job to chase something uncertain. Daniel did not argue. He did not need to convince anyone. Like the eagle does not need to fly with the flock to prove it can fly. 5 years later, things began to change clearly. His project grew. Not fast, but stable. The right decisions accumulated. Past mistakes became experience. He no longer chased opportunities. He chose opportunities. He no longer did everything. He focused on the most important things. And that made the difference. 10 years later, the name Daniel Carter was no longer unfamiliar. Not because he appeared on television, not because he promoted himself, but because what he built had real value. His business expanded, his assets grew, investments began to generate returns. He no longer worried about bills, no longer worried about credit cards, no longer had to choose between needs and affordability. He was not just stable, he was rich, not flashy wealth, but solid wealth. And one day in a local newspaper, he was called one of the most successful people in the state. Daniel read that article. He did not feel proud. He did not feel surprised. Just calm. Because he knew it did not come from luck. It came from the days no one saw. The early mornings, the moments he wanted to quit, the difficult decisions, the painful changes. One afternoon, many years after the day he stood on that rooftop, Daniel returned to that place. The building was still there. The railing was still there. The wind still blew. But he was no longer the same man. He stepped forward, placed his hands on the railing, looked up. The sky was still wide. And then, like a strange coincidence, an eagle appeared. Not too close, not too clear, but enough for him to recognize. It still flew the same way, slow, precise, not rushed. Daniel smiled, not because he needed another lesson, but because he understood. There is something many people do not realize. The eagle is not the strongest animal, not the fastest, not the most numerous, but it is the one that understands best how to exist. It does not chase what does not belong to it. It does not panic when the storm comes. It is not afraid to change, and most importantly, it does not try to become something else. Daniel stepped away from the railing, slowly, not rushed, just like the way he had learned. If you are feeling stuck, if you are facing pressure, if you think you have taken the wrong path, maybe you do not need to do more. You just need to understand more, understand yourself, understand your situation, understand timing. Because sometimes the difference is not that you are stronger than others, but that you understand how you should fly. And if this story makes you look back at yourself, please subscribe to the channel, not only to receive more valuable lessons, but also to be a motivation for the channel to continue searching and bring you more meaningful stories from the mysterious world of animals. Maybe, in one of those stories, you will find yourself.